So thanks a lot for inviting me to talk about Creative Commons licensing. I'll start with a presentation and I hope you can see my slides.
Yes, we can see your slides.
And I would like to stress that Creative Commons licenses are part of copyright, and they just give a little bit more flexibilities to traditional all rights reserved. They introduced a new concept, some rights reserved, and I'll explain in the course of my presentation what are these rights and what are these permissions. And I would like to make a step back and think about copyright in traditional non-digital environment. When I was younger, I studied visual arts, and when I drew a picture and when I give this picture to someone, then the someone, my friend, can actually do anything she wants with this picture. She can pass it on to her friend. She could hang it on a wall. She could even probably destroy it or, I don't know, put it on the floor, and I wouldn't require anything specific from her the way she treats this picture, because she sort of acquires certain rights to do anything she wants with the picture I give her. And when internet started and when digital sharing started, you would assume that it would work like that, that you could still share your works with just as many people as possible. With one picture, you can only give it to one friend. With a digital picture, you can really give it to anyone. And sharing and dissemination is really easy. But unfortunately, with digital products, there are not so many flexibilities, because actually all works in digital form are still copyright protected. And even if I have the means to share them with people, they're still protected by copyrights, and there is a lot of confusion what people could actually do with them, and it covers all types of creative works. That's why there was a need for a system that would make this kind of sharing easier and more clear to people. And the system was introduced as Creative Commons licensing, and they turn traditional all rights reserved, traditional copyright, into some rights reserved. And there are different types of Creative Commons licensing, 6 to be exact, and you could think of them as ice cream with different flavors. Creative Commons is an international organization that developed and maintains those licensing. And if you go to their website, there is this license chooser, which I'm showing now. And the reason I'm showing, because the differences between those licensing lie in the way you answer these 2 questions. Whether you want to allow commercial uses of your work, and depending on whether you say yes or no, there will be different licenses, or whether you allow adaptations of your work that you shared. And here there are 3 answers: yes, no, and yes, as long as others share alike under the same licenses. And again, depending on the type of answer, there will be a type of license. So all these licenses have certain conditions, attribution, non-commercial, no derivatives, and share alike. And let's start with attribution condition. It's a mandatory condition, which is part of every Creative Commons license, which means that if a work is shared under this license, then everyone can use it on the condition to credit the person who created the work. So it's prohibited to take this work and say that you was the author if you want. You should always acknowledge the original author. And that's a license that you get when you allow adaptations, you allow commercial use, and it's called Creative Commons Attribution license. And that's the most open, the most liberal type of Creative Commons license. Another condition that you can introduce in the requirement is non-commercial use only. And this means that everyone will be able to use your work for non-commercial purposes. But if they want to use this work commercially, then they should go back to you and ask specific permission, and then you would allow this. But if people want to use the work non-commercially, they don't need to go back and ask again. You already said that non-commercial use is allowed. And that's when you answer those questions that I showed in the beginning, that you allow adaptations, but you don't allow commercial use of your work. So this license is called Attribution Non-Commercial License. Another license is called No Derivatives. And for example, if I had a picture with 3 dinosaurs, I shared this picture with my friend, and my friend changed. So I had this lively dinosaurs, and my friend killed them all and made a mess with my picture. That's something that is not allowed if I share my work under no derivatives, because it means that no modifications, no adaptations are allowed. So when you have this set of questions, it means that you don't allow, you as an author, you don't allow adaptations, but you allow commercial use of your work. So then this license will be called Attribution No Derivatives license. Another condition is share alike, and that's a license that Wikipedia uses. And it means that adaptations are allowed, changes are allowed, as long as new works are licensed under the same license as I had. So for example, if mine was non-commercial use only, attribution non-commercial use, you took it, for example, it was an article. You took this article, you translated it into your language, and you have to license that article that you translated under the same attribution non-commercial license. For example, if that was the license that I had. So all derivative works are licensed under the same license. So then the answer to this question about adaptations will be yes, as long as other share alike under the same license and commercial uses are allowed. So then this license is called Attribution Share Alike license. And then there are additional versions, because you could have at the same time a condition which would be non-commercial, no derivative, or non-commercial share alike. So there are there is one Creative Commons license with just one condition, attribution, 3 with 2 conditions, standard attribution, and then share alike, non-commercial, no derivatives, and then 2, which include 3 conditions: mandatory attribution, and then non-commercial share alike, or non-commercial no derivatives. So just to recap, attribution is mandatory for all licenses, and then there are different variations: share alike, like Wikipedia articles, non-commercial use only, no derivatives, and then attribution plus non-commercial plus share alike, no derivatives. Creative Commons licenses use these 4 standard symbols to explain what is allowed in non-legal language. They provide 4 possible conditions for reuse, and that makes altogether 6 Creative Commons licenses. So how exactly do they work? You could think of them as a cake with different layers. So for example, top layer could be this human readable text, those symbols that I showed: attribution, non-commercial, share alike, and this is something that a user would understand. Then another layer is actual legal code. Creative Commons licenses are contracts, and if someone doesn't follow those licenses, then it's a reason to go to court and prove that that person was wrong. And there were a number of court cases in European countries already, and in the US, that proved that Creative Commons licenses are valid licenses of copyright, and they protected the rights of authors in those court cases. So it's also a legal document, but it's a long document, a couple of pages, and it's written in legal language. And then another layer, which is very important for us when we talk about digital works, is the fact that those licenses are machine readable, which means that they are also a piece of code that computers, systems, search engines, machines understand, and they are able to read that machine readable code. So it's a human readable, simple legal code and actual digital code. Human readable commons deeds, lawyer readable legal code, and then machine readable digital code. How you might see them in the articles. So this is an example of the article, and you can see at the bottom where it says copyright. This is a text that copyright belongs to authors, and this is an open access article distributed under the Creative Commons Attribution license, which permits unrestricted use, distribution, and reproduction in any medium provided that original work is properly cited. So this is an example of an attribution, and most open access publishers use this most open version of Creative Commons licenses, Creative Commons Attribution, which means that users are free to share, copy, and redistribute this article or this work material in any medium or format, and they are free to adapt, which means remix, transform, build upon the material for any purpose, even commercially, under the following terms: attribution, that every user must give appropriate credit, and also provides a link to the license, and if there are any changes, to indicate those. And that's an example of that legal code. So it's just one page, and as you can see, it goes longer and longer. And this is an example of machine readable code that you can take and embed in your website, for example. And Creative Commons licenses proved to be very popular because they create a very easy way to share research materials. And last time when Creative Commons counted them, there were 1.6 billion works. And I mentioned an example of scholarly journal publishers, but of course there are other examples from visual arts, from music, and from all other areas. My second part of this presentation is how to use Creative Commons licenses in repositories. And my colleagues wrote a guide. They are legal experts, and they did a research what would be the best way to license the repository. And they suggest the following wording and example. So they suggest Creative Commons attribution license, specifying that unless otherwise noted, this repository is under a CC BY 4.0 license. 4.0 means that it's the latest version of the article of the license, because there were 4 iterations of those Creative Commons licenses. And the reason they recommended this kind of license because Creative Commons licenses are internationally recognized, well established, and both human readable and machine readable. They meet the definition of open access as defined in Budapest Open Access Initiative, Bethesda Statement, and Berlin Declaration on Open Access. And because this type of license, Creative Commons Attribution, is one of the most compatible licenses for interoperability purposes. And this is an example how we upload articles in one of the repositories where we have a joint project. So it's a local journal article, and it's uploaded under Creative Commons Attribution license. This is an example of a policy that we developed for that particular repository where we work. It's a national open access repository, and we said that files may be deposited under closed, open, embargoed, or restricted access. And we consider Creative Commons Attribution license as a preferred license for institutional publications, for those publications where those who upload hold a copyright, because of course you can't take my work, for example, and license it, because only an author or copyright holder could select a license. And we also say that metadata in the repository could be reused under the same Creative Commons licenses. I want to show you a couple of examples how other repositories explain copyright and versioning to their authors, because one step is to license your repository, to select the license for your repository, and then the next step is what kind of copyright statement you use for the content you upload. And it's a library information sheet from University College Dublin, which I really like. And they address this issue of embargoes and versioning, because those of you who work with a repository, you know that unfortunately not every publisher allows immediate open access to the published version. Conditions are different, but usually it's a post-print version version which was accepted for publication and includes all peer review comments is allowed to be deposited either immediately or under some embargo period. Unfortunately, it's not very common that publishers would allow that version of record or publish a PDF to be deposited. But it's not really a problem, because some authors might say that this author accepted version is not really the final version, but the content of it is identical to the one published, just the layout is slightly different. And this is LibGuide from the same, no, that's, yeah, from the same UCD library, where they created a document describing publishers' copyright and embargo policies. They looked what are the journals in which their researchers publish, and then they described publishers' copyright and embargo policies using Sherpa Romeo website, which I will show in a minute. And they also have a very useful page which explains the differences between this author accepted version, final author manuscript, and a publisher version. So they have a page which is called correct version. And for example, they show how a post-print version looks like. So usually it's not formatted. It looks like this or like this. It could be a camera-ready version, but numbering always starts as 1, and there is no reference to the publication title. So that's also how you can see that this version of article is a version that you could upload, or these articles could contain line numbers but no other marking. For example, this version is also acceptable, but this version would already be a publisher PDF, because you could see that there is a certain design, pagination, publisher specific types of data, for example, copyright symbol, DOI, branding. So if you have this kind of version, and if a publisher doesn't allow uploading this kind of version, unfortunately, you can't make it open access in your repository. And Sherpa Romeo is a very useful database where you could check publisher copyright permissions, and they changed it recently. So now it's really, really good. So for example, I searched for a particular journal policy, and this is a result that this journal, this journal's policy doesn't allow for open access to the published version, but it allows open access for accepted version 6 months after publication. And there are conditions that a version in the repository must link to publisher version, published sources must be acknowledged and DOI cited. And they also allow immediate depositing of submitted version, also with similar conditions. But the problem with submitted version is that content might be different from the published version, because perhaps after peer review, author would make some changes, and then those changes won't be reflected in the submitted version. That's why repositories are trying to make available this accepted version or publish a PDF if possible, because they are the final version. And this comic also explains that this submitted version is also called preprint, and most publishers would allow making it immediately available. Then post-print is a version after peer review, and again, most publishers allow making it available, but usually not immediately, after some time after embargo period. And then this version of record is publisher branded version, which is unfortunately not many publishers allow to use. This website is another example where you can search for permissions by author name. Sherpa Romeo allows you to search by a publisher or journal title. Here you can search by an author, and it uses data from Sherpa Romeo. So for example, I was searching for an author whose name was like this. And then I found that she published one paper. And when you click on this paper, then you can see that preprint, a publisher allows archiving of preprint, postprint, but published version archiving is forbidden. So it's really important to educate your researchers to keep this version which they approve for publication, final peer-reviewed manuscript or author accepted version, and make it available in the repository. That was about journal articles. What do we do with theses? In that other national repository, which we helped to manage that I showed earlier, we decided that we just use Creative Commons attribution license for all thesis and dissertations from that country. Some other universities, for example, this American University of Armenia, they have an agreement which is signed by an author of a thesis. And in this agreement, they confirm that they are owner of this thesis, that it's their responsibility to obtain permission of third-party copyright owners. So for example, if they use some visuals in the thesis, that they have permission to use those visuals, and they confirm that it's an original work. And they are asked to select one of the 6 Creative Commons licenses, and it's an author's choice which one to use. But I think it's a bit too much to put on the author, because they might not be aware of all these differences between the licensing, and they might not be aware what's the best choice of licenses. So I think it's better if you have a decision in your university that you would license all your theses, for example, with one license, for example, Creative Commons attribution, and then you just inform your researchers, and they don't need to make this choice. And the visuals that I used come from this comic, sharing creative works. And just one more thing before questions. I'll show you some recent articles that we had to upload to the repository, and how you can check all these copyright permissions and select the right license. For that, I need to stop sharing and open those articles and share them. So just a second. So this is an example of a conference paper that we received. Let me make it a little bit bigger. So you can see that a layout is like that. So there is no publisher branding. There is nothing about copyright, like there is no copyright symbol. So that's a version that could be uploaded to the repository. another example. I hope you can still see it. You can see that it's a different one. And here there is a title. There is a copyright statement in the end. But the copyright statement is like I showed earlier, that it's copyright belongs to the authors and it could be shared under Creative Commons Attribution license. So it's an open access article and a publisher allows making this publisher PDF openly available. So you can do that. Another example is this article. There is a publisher branding, but also in the copyright notice it says copyright by the authors, published by Elsevier. This is an open access article under Creative Commons non-commercial, no derivative license. So it could be uploaded to the repository under this license. So that's another example. Also, you could see that it's an open access article because it says copyright by the authors, but the license is an earlier version, so it's Creative Commons Attribution, this 03, and not the latest 04. And then this example, it has publisher branding because it's a journal article published in Elsevier, but then in copyright it says copyright 2018 Elsevier, all rights reserved. And all rights reserved means that you can't upload this version to the repository. You can either ask your author to give you that accepted version, approved version, and this journal has 2 years embargo period. So 2 years after publication, you can make the version, post-print version, openly available in the repository. So I hope that gives you some idea about Creative Commons licenses and how they could be used in your repositories. And I don't know if you noticed on my slides, I had Creative Commons Attribution license, which means that I encourage you to reuse my slides and you don't need to ask for permission. Any questions?
Thank you, Dr. Chuma. Colleagues, this is time for questions, comments. You can raise up your hand or you can pose the question on the chat. Thank you.
Yeah, please, Winnie, you have to unmute yourself and then you should be able to speak.
Thank you, Irina and Ms. T. I think for Irina, this subject that we are still wrapping our fingers around and that we need to really practice in order to grasp a better understanding on it. And one of the things from your discussion that really opened my mind is that when we ask for our researchers to deposit into our repository, we normally don't ask them to select which attributes they would like their item to be. And it's one of the things that really, that I appreciated from your presentation. And also that as we normally make presentation to different organizations or conferences, normally we don't include the attributions that we would like them to be attached to those presentations. It was a learning point for me in your presentation.
Thanks a lot, Sarah. Any other questions or feedback? I know that it might be too much to grasp with, especially on Friday morning.
Yes, I have a question concerning uploading articles under Creative Commons license on the institutional repository. You will find that when we are using the DSpace. So at the final, when we choose the license, it does normally show whether it should be the Creative Commons, but there will be a statement that we are giving rights to people to use it openly, but there is nothing about Creative Commons license. So I wanted to know whether we have to integrate or we have to do something in order for us to have that Creative Commons, maybe symbol, license symbols.
Mm-hmm. So I think it's better if you also include a license symbol. And if you give me a second, I can show you where exactly in the space, which fields in the space you have to fill in for the license to appear. And I'll also add that to my slides that I'll send to you.
Mm-hmm.
So just a second. Because before, with that national repository, we were using DSpace, and I created a guide. Now we're using another software, but I found those instructions. Just a minute, because I don't want to make a mistake.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So I'll share my screen again. Just need to make it a little bit bigger so that you could see it. So what we used DC rights field, where we would say the license, for example, Creative Commons Attribution license, and then in another field, DC rights URI, we would put a URL to the license, and then it looks on DSpace like this. So you have description, and then it's the license is shown, and then there is this statement. The item's license is described as Creative Commons Attribution license. So try those two fields, DC rights and DC rights URI, and I'll add that to my slide.
Okay, just a follow-up for this description rights is by default is included on the fields that we are filling on DSpace, or we should include them.
They should be one of the fields when you describe metadata. They are part of the standard set, so you should have them in your repository. But please check, and if you don't have, let me know, and I'll help you to add them.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. And Dr. Libelle? Because it seems that your hand is raised.
Yeah, thank you very much, Irina. Thank you so much. Apologies, as I tripped on my connections this side and the whole thing went black. I don't know what I did. My comment goes back to even your profile, as well presented by Duelo. It shows so much professional activity that one can do in the area of open access or even Creative Commons. for me, it opened eyes on the so many activities that we can do. And I think a word that I could say to colleagues is we need not look only at the repository aspect. There is a lot. I think visiting your profile, which I would propose Ms. Tuelo should share with us so that we study and see areas of interest that we can pick from it. That is if it's not governed by any copyrights that would happen now. And then another comment that I make, I find is when we get to throughout the presentation, one then would say, who is it the responsibility of the library to inform the institution on what policies to adopt? Because I heard you saying it might be too much for the researchers or for the authors to be learning or to be knowing what rights to have or what rights to give. So the institution has to develop a policy. So in other words, it's for the library to inform that policy.
I think so.
Position.
In collaboration with your legal department, of course, and with your university administration and with the faculty. But I think library is well positioned because they are a library is at the forefront of scholarly communications developments, which maybe not everyone in the university have time to follow. So I think initiative should come from the library, and the document that you shared with me, I think it's very good. So maybe only think about adding something about copyright permissions, because I didn't see anything related to that in the policy.
So in a way that could answer a question that could be in one of us minds, what does all these things have to do with us as librarians? It then is saying even the work that they use for teaching, as everybody else is going online lately, even the work that they use, we need to teach them how to assess if they have the right to use, they have the right to derive anything from it, if they have a right to copy the same way, just the same way that we used to manage how they photocopied the number of pages in a book. Yeah. No, I think the final one is just a wrap up of the comment I made. Thank you.
Thank you. And if you're interested in any other topics, if you're interested in open science training, or if you want to know more about some aspects of repository management, we could always do another meetup with you. Or maybe if things permit, we could even meet face-to-face next year and do something face-to-face. So thanks a lot for your initiative. Really happy to be working with your university.
One last follow-up question, Arina. We have been to the library school many years ago, and definitely we were not taught this. So if one wants to pursue this, is there a structured program that one can engage in to learn and at the end of the day get a certificate or a degree or a diploma out of it?
Well, unfortunately, I also, as you heard from my profile, I've never studied library and information science, so I don't really know how it is now, but hopefully a lot of universities already introduce that as part of their courses, standard courses. But I think for us, the best way is this continuous professional development. And we have an African initiative called LeapSense, where we're looking into skills profiles that libraries should be building in this scholarly communication landscape, and also training programs they should be given. And now we are finalizing this continuous professional development curricular, and we'll also try to develop some courses. So I'll share with you this information when I have it, and I'll ask colleagues if they could recommend a program where you could also get a certificate. And I also want to mention another webinar that we'll be doing on Monday about persistent identifiers, DOIs for publications, ORCID for researchers, and ROR for organizations. And I put a link in the chat to the registration page, and I'll also include it in the email with my slides. So if you're interested to know more about persistent identifiers, and if you have time on Monday, I think it should be 1 o'clock your time. Please join it, and I'll keep you posted when there are similar webinars or events.